The mail still sat untouched in the mailbox on Elm Street, 3 days after the live stream ended. Inside the quiet house in Franklin, Tennessee, dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon sun, illuminating a scene of undisturbed domesticity that stood in stark contrast to the silence. This was the home of Eleanor Vance, a woman known in her close-knit community primarily for her unwavering faith and her alto voice in the First Baptist Church choir. Her neighbors, accustomed to her predictable routine, the morning paper retrieved promptly, the car leaving for work precisely at 7:45 a.m., had begun to notice the unsettling stillness. Concern had morphed into alarm. A call was made. The responding officer, a seasoned veteran of the Franklin Police Department, found the front door unlocked, a detail that felt immediately wrong in this quiet, ordered neighborhood. Stepping inside, the air was still, cool, and carried the faint clinical scent of lemon polish. The officer moved cautiously through the living room, noting the tidy furniture, the framed family photos on the mantelpiece, the Bible open on a small side table. Everything appeared normal. A snapshot of life paused mid-stride. He called out Eleanor Vance's name. There was no reply. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. The officer proceeded towards the back of the house, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The kitchen was similarly immaculate, dishes washed and dried, a grocery list pinned to the refrigerator. It was the kind of house where life ran on schedule, where disorder was an anomaly, but the silence remained, growing louder in its absence of sound. Reaching the back bedroom, the officer stopped at the doorway. The scene was not one of violent intrusion, not immediately. It was quiet, deeply unsettling. Eleanor Vance lay on the floor beside her bed. There were no signs of a struggle that were immediately apparent. Her eyes were closed. The room was neat, the bedclothes undisturbed. It was the stillness, the unnatural angle of her body, and the faint discoloration around her lips that told the story the quiet room tried to conceal. She was dead. The tranquility of Elm Street was shattered by the arrival of more police cruisers, the flashing blue and red lights casting an eerie glow on the manicured lawns. Crime scene tape, a bright yellow ribbon of finality, was stretched around the modest brick ranch house, sealing off the interior from the ordinary world outside. Neighbors gathered on their porches and sidewalks, speaking in hushed tones, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Eleanor Vance, the quiet woman from the choir, taken so suddenly, so silently. The news spread quickly through Franklin, rippling outward from Elm Street to the downtown square, reaching the doors of the First Baptist Church just blocks away. A respected member of the congregation gone. The initial reports were vague, focusing on the unexpected nature of her death. But within hours, questions began to circulate. Whispers that connected Eleanor Vance's sudden passing to events that had unfolded online just days before. Events that had rocked the very foundations of the church community. The perfect facade of faith and fellowship in Franklin was beginning to crack. The initial investigation was methodical, constrained by procedure and the necessity of establishing facts before speculation could take hold. Patrol officers secured the perimeter. Detectives were summoned to the scene, their faces grim and focused. The medical examiner was called. Each person entering the house on Elm Street moved with a deliberate, almost reverent caution, aware they were stepping into a space where life had ended abruptly and under mysterious circumstances. The air inside the house held a strange tension, a mixture of the mundane scent of home and the sharp, coppery smell that hinted at the violence that had occurred, however quietly. Photographs were taken of everything: the exterior of the house, the open door, the tidy living room, the kitchen, the hallway. The focus narrowed to the bedroom. Here, the silence felt heavier, charged with the weight of what had happened. The position of the body was documented from multiple angles. Initial observations were made about the immediate surroundings: the bedside table, the floor area, the state of the room. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, no ransacking, suggesting either the killer knew Eleanor Vance, or she had let them in. This detail immediately shifted the focus of the investigation inward, away from random crime and towards the personal sphere of the victim's life. Who would Eleanor Vance let into her home? Who would want her dead? The quiet questions hung in the air of the death room, waiting for evidence to provide the answers. The initial report from the responding officer noted the undisturbed state of the majority of the house, emphasizing the bedroom as the central focus of the scene. This lack of general disarray complicated the initial assessment. Homicide detectives, led by Lieutenant Miller, arrived on the scene shortly after the patrol officers discovered. Lieutenant Miller, a man with decades of experience in navigating the complexities of human behavior and its darker manifestations, surveyed the scene with a quiet intensity. He spoke little, observing the body, the room, the subtle details that might escape a less experienced eye. The initial visual assessment of the body did not immediately suggest a clear mode of death to the responding officers. There were no obvious stab wounds, gunshot wounds, or massive trauma. This absence of overt violence contributed to the initial confusion and underscored the need for a thorough forensic examination. The medical examiner arrived and began their preliminary assessment at the scene. A cold, clinical process carried out with respect for the deceased, but with an unblinking focus on the facts of the body itself. The discoloration observed by the first officer was noted more precisely. The medical examiner's initial impression was that the death had occurred relatively recently, likely within the last 24 to 48 hours, a time frame that aligned chillingly with when neighbors had last seen Eleanor or noticed her usual activities cease. The undisturbed mail in the box outside became a critical, simple marker of the timeline. 3 days. 3 days had passed since Eleanor Vance's life had followed its predictable steady course. 3 days since anyone had seen her alive and well. The silence in the house wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the deafening silence of a life abruptly ended, a routine permanently broken. The question of how quickly became paramount. Without overt signs of violence, possibilities ranged from natural causes to poisoning or suffocation, methods that could leave minimal trace on the immediate scene. The forensic team began their meticulous work, sifting through the bedroom, looking for fibers, hairs, fluids, anything that didn't belong, anything that could speak to the events that transpired in the hours before Eleanor Vance was found. The victim's computer and phone were identified as critical pieces of evidence, to be collected and sent for digital forensics. In the age of digital connection, the truth of a person's final days, their conflicts, their fears, were often preserved, not on paper, but in pixels. Detectives began the process of canvassing the neighborhood, speaking to those who lived closest to Eleanor Vance. The neighbors uniformly described her as quiet, kind, deeply religious, someone who kept to herself but was friendly when encountered. Her routine was noted repeatedly: church on Sundays and Wednesdays, choir practice, work at the local library, tending her small garden. No enemies that they knew of. No loud arguments heard. Nothing out of the ordinary, until the stillness. This portrait of Eleanor Vance, the quiet churchgoer with the predictable life, made her death all the more perplexing and disturbing. Why would someone target such a person? What hidden conflicts lay beneath the surface of her seemingly placid existence? The focus of the investigation widened from the immediate crime scene to the victim's life, seeking any disruption, any conflict, any relationship that could have led to this quiet, violent end. And quickly, the name of the First Baptist Church, and its charismatic leader, began to surface in conversations. Eleanor Vance's life in Franklin, Tennessee, revolved significantly around the First Baptist Church. It was more than a place of worship. It was a community hub, a social center, and for Eleanor, a source of identity and belonging. She had been a member for over 20 years, her involvement deepening over time. She volunteered for church events, helped with the Sunday school, and most significantly, was a dedicated member of the adult choir. The choir was more than just a musical group. It was a tight-knit assembly, individuals bound by shared faith and the common goal of enhancing worship through song. They rehearsed weekly, performed every Sunday, and often socialized outside of church activities. Eleanor, while reserved, found camaraderie and purpose within this group. She possessed a clear, steady alto voice that provided a reliable foundation for the choir's sound. Her commitment was absolute. The church itself had experienced a period of revitalization in recent years, largely attributed to the arrival of Pastor Anya Sharma. Pastor Sharma was dynamic, articulate, and possessed a powerful presence both in the pulpit and in person. She was younger than the previous pastor, brought a modern sensibility to her sermons, and had a remarkable ability to connect with the congregation on a personal level. Attendance had increased, new programs had been implemented, and there was a palpable energy surrounding her leadership. Her sermons were often broadcast online, reaching a wider audience beyond the physical walls of the church. She quickly became a respected, almost revered, figure in the Franklin community, known for her compassion and inspiring messages. Eleanor Vance was initially among Pastor Sharma's most fervent admirers. She spoke of the pastor's sermons with genuine enthusiasm, and felt a renewed sense of purpose in her faith under Sharma's guidance. The choir, too, seemed to flourish under the pastor's attention, often featured prominently in services and online broadcasts. However, as time went on, subtle shifts began to occur within the church's inner circles, particularly within the choir. Whispers, barely audible at first, began to circulate. These were not rumors of doctrinal disputes or administrative disagreements, but something far more personal, far more unsettling. The rumors centered on Pastor Sharma herself, and her relationships with members of the congregation, specifically, members of the choir. The whispers suggested an inappropriate intimacy, a blurring of professional and personal boundaries that went far beyond the expected closeness between a pastor and their flock. Initially, these were dismissed by many as gossip, fueled by envy or misunderstanding. Pastor Sharma presented such a picture of piety and strength, but the whispers persisted, growing in volume and specificity. They spoke of preferential treatment for certain choir members, of late-night meetings, of an undeniable chemistry that seemed to extend beyond spiritual guidance. Eleanor Vance, immersed in the choir's daily life, was in a position to observe these dynamics firsthand. It is difficult to reconstruct precisely when Eleanor's perception of Pastor Sharma began to change, when admiration curdled into disillusionment. Perhaps it was a specific incident she witnessed, a conversation she overheard, or a pattern of behavior that became impossible to ignore. What is clear based on later accounts and evidence is that Eleanor Vance became increasingly troubled by what she perceived as hypocrisy and exploitation within the church she loved. The choir, once a sanctuary, began to feel compromised, tainted by the very person who was supposed to lead them in worship. Her discomfort was not widely known. Eleanor was not one to openly confront or gossip. She processed her feelings internally, struggling with the conflict between her faith in the institution of the church and her growing conviction that its leader was engaged in deeply inappropriate conduct. This internal struggle likely weighed heavily on her, a quiet battle of conscience against loyalty and fear. The decision she ultimately made was not impulsive. It was, based on the evidence that would later emerge, a calculated act born out of a profound sense of moral obligation. She believed the truth needed to be exposed, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the integrity of the church community itself. The act of exposing a beloved pastor, particularly one as charismatic and influential as Anya Sharma, carried immense risk. It meant potentially alienating friends, facing disbelief and hostility from fellow congregants, and challenging a powerful figure head-on. Eleanor Vance, a woman who valued peace and quiet, chose a path that would inevitably lead to upheaval. Her choice of method was significant. A live stream. In the digital age, a live stream offered a direct, unfiltered channel to a potentially wide audience. It bypassed traditional gatekeepers and allowed for an immediate public dissemination of information. It was a modern tool used to reveal a betrayal that felt as old as Scripture itself. Preparing for such an event would have required deliberate steps, gathering her thoughts, deciding what specifically to reveal, perhaps even practicing how she would deliver her message. This was not a spur-of-the-moment outburst, but a planned action by a woman pushed to her limit. The quiet details of her home on Elm Street, the tidy routine, the open Bible, stood in stark contrast to the dramatic public confrontation she was planning. The tension between her private, ordered life and the impending public chaos must have been immense in the days leading up to the live stream. What transpired next would unleash forces that neither she nor anyone else in the First Baptist Church community could fully control. The stage was set, unknowingly to most, for a collision between faith and betrayal, played out in the unforgiving glare of digital publicity. The decision solidified. Eleanor Vance began to prepare. Her usual quiet demeanor masked a steely resolve. She spent hours alone in her home, researching, gathering information, and carefully structuring the narrative she intended to share. This wasn't just about naming names. It was about presenting a case, however informally, to the court of public opinion, and more importantly, to her fellow church members. She compiled dates, specific incidents she had witnessed or been privy to, and perhaps even communications she had received or observed. The level of detail she sought indicated a desire for her allegations to be taken seriously, to be seen not as malicious gossip, but as factual disclosures. Her computer became a central tool in this preparation. Digital footprints would later reveal extensive browsing history related to Pastor Sharma, the church's online presence, and perhaps even legal resources or forums discussing clergy misconduct. She learned the mechanics of setting up a live stream, testing equipment, understanding how to go live and reach an audience. This was a technological undertaking for a woman more accustomed to hymns and scripture, demonstrating the depth of her conviction. The inherent risks were undeniable. Exposure could lead to ostracism, legal challenges from the church or Pastor Sharma, and significant disruption to her own life. Yet, she pressed forward, driven by a sense of moral urgency. The silence she had maintained for months, perhaps years, was about to be broken in the most public way she could conceive. The choice of platform was likely Facebook or YouTube, commonly used for church broadcasts and personal sharing. She needed a platform where her message could reach the First Baptist Church community directly and immediately. Setting up the camera or laptop, finding the right angle in her home. These practical steps underscored the deliberate nature of her act. It wasn't a spontaneous confession, it was a planned disclosure. The days leading up to the live stream must have been fraught with anxiety, yet also determination. She continued her usual routine, attending work, perhaps even attending choir practice, maintaining her outward composure while preparing for an act of profound disruption. This duality highlights the quiet strength beneath her gentle exterior. She was not an activist or a public figure. She was a church member compelled by conscience. The specific date and time of the live stream were chosen strategically, likely when she anticipated maximum viewership among her local network or church connections. Perhaps it was an evening, after work hours when people were home and online. The technical setup in her home was likely modest. A laptop or phone propped on a table, perhaps positioned in her living room or study, a space that felt familiar and safe to her, even as she prepared to deliver an explosive message to the world. The content of her planned exposure focused on the alleged relationships between Pastor Sharma and multiple members of the choir. The title of the story, "Female Pastor Slept with Her Entire Choir," suggests the breadth of the allegations. Eleanor Vance was prepared to articulate the details, the specific individuals she believed were involved, and the ways in which she felt these relationships had corrupted the spiritual environment of the church. This was not a vague accusation, but a targeted, specific set of claims. Her motivations, based on later analysis, appeared to be rooted in a desire for truth and accountability, not personal gain or malice. She saw herself as a whistleblower, exposing wrongdoing to protect the community she loved. The act itself, going live, pressing the button to broadcast her message, must have been a moment of immense tension and finality. There was no turning back once the words were spoken, once the allegations were made public. The quiet life she knew on Elm Street was about to intersect violently with the public persona of a charismatic church leader. The live stream began. Eleanor Vance, sitting in her home, began to speak. Her voice, usually reserved for hymns, was steady, though likely tinged with emotion. She laid out her allegations methodically, presenting what she knew and what she believed to be true. She spoke of Pastor Sharma's influence, the power dynamics within the church, and the specific relationships she claimed were occurring within the choir. She likely named names, detailing incidents and observation. The immediate reaction online would have been swift and varied: shock, disbelief, support, anger. The digital world, usually a space for sharing everyday moments, became the arena for a profound and damaging revelation. As the live stream unfolded, viewers in Franklin and beyond tuned in, drawn by the sensational nature of the claims or the connection to their local church. The digital recording of this event would later become a crucial piece of evidence, preserving Eleanor Vance's final public act and the allegations that precipitated the crisis. This live stream was not just a confession or a complaint, it was an indictment, delivered directly to the community she felt had been deceived. The impact was immediate and seismic. Within the First Baptist Church community, the live stream caused an uproar. Members watched in stunned silence or vocal disbelief. Calls and messages flooded social media and personal phones. The carefully constructed image of Pastor Sharma and the church was fracturing in real time. For those implicated or closely connected, the exposure was devastating. The aftermath of the live stream was a period of intense turmoil. The quiet normalcy of Franklin, Tennessee was disrupted by a scandal that originated within the walls of its prominent church and exploded online. Eleanor Vance, having delivered her message, retreated from the public eye, likely bracing for the inevitable backlash. What happened in the hours and days immediately following the live stream, and how those events led to the silence on Elm Street, became the central mystery the Franklin Police Department was now tasked with unraveling. The digital ghost of Eleanor's live stream hung in the air, a record of the conflict that had potentially cost her her life. The live stream ended, leaving behind a digital echo of its explosive contents. The immediate aftermath within the First Baptist Church community was chaos. Phones rang incessantly. Social media platforms buzzed with frantic messages and heated arguments. Disbelief warred with dawning realization for many church members. Pastor Anya Sharma's carefully cultivated image was under direct assault from within her own congregation, broadcast for anyone to see. While the digital world processed the shockwaves, Eleanor Vance was back in her quiet home on Elm Street. What happened there in the hours and days following the live stream is not fully known, but investigators would later piece together a timeline based on forensic evidence and witness statements. It is likely that Eleanor received a torrent of messages, calls, or perhaps even visitors reacting to her broadcast. Some may have been supportive, others undoubtedly hostile, defending the pastor or denying the allegations. The pressure on her would have been immense. The conflict she had brought into the open was now personal and immediate. Days passed. The mail accumulated in the box outside. The routine on Elm Street ceased. Inside, Eleanor Vance was already dead. The discovery of her body on Wednesday afternoon transformed the online scandal into a homicide investigation. The scene in her bedroom, while initially lacking overt signs of violence, held critical clues for the meticulous forensic team. As they processed the scene, focusing intensely on the victim's body and its immediate surroundings, they began to uncover details missed in the initial walkthrough. Subtle petechial hemorrhages were noted in the eyes and on the skin, tiny spots caused by broken capillaries. These suggested some form of asphyxiation or suffocation. There were also faint, almost imperceptible marks around the neck or mouth area, requiring careful examination under specialized lighting and magnification. The absence of significant bruising or ligature marks pointed towards a method that left minimal external trauma, such as manual strangulation with a soft object, or suffocation. This finding provided the first critical forensic twist. Eleanor Vance had been deliberately killed. It was not a natural death occurring after the stress of the live stream. It was murder. The time of death was estimated by the medical examiner, based on rigor mortis, livor mortis, and body temperature, combined with the neighbor's timeline of when Eleanor's usual activity ceased. The time of death was narrowed down to a window beginning sometime Tuesday evening, after her routine would typically have concluded. This time frame, roughly 24 to 48 hours before discovery, placed her death squarely in the immediate fallout period following her Monday or Tuesday live stream. The exact day of the stream would be a crucial detail to verify. This timing strongly linked her death to the exposure. The motive appeared clear: retaliation for the live stream. But who was responsible? The absence of forced entry suggested the killer was someone Eleanor knew, someone she would have allowed into her home, even late in the evening. This narrowed the suspect pool considerably, focusing attention on individuals connected to the allegations she had made. Pastor Sharma herself, individuals within the choir she had named, or possibly people close to them who felt threatened or angered by the exposure. The digital evidence collected from Eleanor's home became paramount. Her computer and phone were seized. Forensics experts began the painstaking process of extracting data: call logs, text messages, emails, social media activity, browser history, and crucially, the recorded live stream and any associated communications around it. This digital trail promised to reveal who she had been interacting with in her final hours, who might have threatened her, or who might have arranged to meet her. The digital footprint of the live stream itself was analyzed. Who had watched it? Who had commented? Who had reacted negatively? This audience list, potentially spanning hundreds or thousands of people, needed to be filtered to identify those with a direct connection to the church, the choir, or the individuals named. The investigation fanned out from Elm Street to the First Baptist Church and its congregation. Detectives began the difficult process of interviewing church members, starting with those closest to Eleanor and those named in her live stream. These interviews were delicate, navigating a community reeling from scandal and now murder. People were reluctant to speak, fearful or fiercely protective of Pastor Sharma. The contrast between the public face of the church, a place of faith and community, and the private reality of alleged misconduct and now violent death, was stark and deeply unsettling to the investigators working the case. The initial interviews with choir members and church leadership were met with varying degrees of cooperation. Some were devastated by Eleanor's death and the scandal. Others expressed anger at Eleanor for making the allegations, suggesting she was misguided, lying, or seeking attention. Pastor Sharma released a carefully worded statement through a church elder, expressing sorrow at Eleanor Vance's passing and calling for unity and prayer during this difficult time, making no mention of the live stream or the allegation. This official silence on the central controversy was noted by investigators. The crime scene analysis continued. In addition to the focus on the body, the forensic team processed the rest of the house with meticulous care. Were there signs of a struggle that had been cleaned up? Was anything missing? Were there any foreign fibers, hairs, or DNA samples? A specific forensic detail emerged during this deeper processing. A faint but discernible imprint on the carpet near where Eleanor's body was found. It wasn't a footprint, but something else, possibly left by an object. This finding, seemingly minor, became a point of intense focus. What object could have left such an imprint? And how did it relate to the manner of death? This small, silent detail in the carpet of a quiet bedroom in Franklin, Tennessee, offered a new avenue of inquiry, a subtle twist in a case that was already defined by its unsettling quietness. The faint imprint on the carpet in Eleanor Vance's bedroom became a puzzle piece demanding immediate attention. Forensic analysts meticulously photographed and cast the impression. It wasn't deep, suggesting a moderate weight or pressure, and its shape wasn't immediately identifiable as a shoe or a hand. It was roughly circular with some internal pattern. This finding spurred a more granular examination of the entire room, looking for any object that might correspond to the impression, or any other anomaly. Meanwhile, the digital forensic unit was making progress. Data was being extracted from Eleanor's computer and phone. The live stream video itself was a critical piece of evidence, confirming the nature and specificity of her allegations against Pastor Sharma and the choir members. Analysis of her call logs and text messages from the days leading up to and immediately following the livestream revealed a pattern of communication. There were calls and text to close friends and family, expressing anxiety but also resolve. More significantly, there were communications with individuals associated with the church. Some of these were supportive, others were clearly confrontational. There were also communications with individuals who were allegedly involved in the relationships mentioned in the live stream. These exchanges, preserved in digital form, provided a window into the escalating tension in Eleanor's final days. Investigators focused on communications that occurred after the live stream concluded and before the estimated time of death. Were there threats, attempts to silence her? Did anyone try to arrange a meeting? One series of text messages stood out. They were exchanged late on Tuesday evening, within the estimated time frame of Eleanor's death. The messages were between Eleanor and a number saved simply as choir admin. This number was quickly identified as belonging to Sarah Miller, a longtime member of the choir and an administrative assistant at the church, known to be very close to Pastor Sharma. The texts indicated a planned meeting at Eleanor's house that evening. The tone of Sarah's messages was initially persuasive, urging Eleanor to take down the video and talk things through privately. Eleanor's responses were firm, refusing to remove the video, stating she had spoken the truth. The final messages from Sarah became more insistent, almost pleading, suggesting it was crucial they talk face to face, for the sake of the church. The conversation ended abruptly on Eleanor's end, with an unread message from Sarah time-stamped just before the estimated window of death began. This digital exchange provided the most concrete evidence yet of someone being at Eleanor's home around the time of her death, someone connected directly to the subject of her live stream. The focus of the investigation shifted sharply towards Sarah Miller. Sarah was brought in for questioning. She confirmed the text messages and admitted she had gone to Eleanor's house on Tuesday evening. She stated she wanted to persuade Eleanor to retract her allegations and protect the church from scandal. She claimed she met with Eleanor. They talked for a while, and she left when Eleanor remained resolute. She denied any physical confrontation or involvement in Eleanor's death. Her demeanor during the interview was outwardly cooperative, but investigators noted a nervous tension and evasiveness on specific details of the conversation. When asked about the exact duration of her visit and what specifically was discussed, her answers became vague. Meanwhile, forensic work on the carpet imprint yielded a crucial breakthrough. Specialists consulting with object recognition databases determined the imprint was consistent with the base of a specific model of heavy, decorative candlestick. This wasn't just any candlestick. It was identified as the kind often used on altar tables or pulpits in churches, sometimes even carried in procession. This forensic twist was significant. It linked the crime scene, however subtly, to the very institution at the heart of the scandal. The First Baptist Church. A search warrant was obtained for the church premises, specifically focusing on areas where such candlesticks might be kept or used. During the search, several candlesticks were found, including a set of identical heavy brass candlesticks used on the main altar. One of these candlesticks was missing from its usual place. When located in a nearby storage room, forensic technicians carefully examined its base. Under microscopic analysis, trace fibers and a minute amount of biological material were found adhering to the base. These samples were collected and sent for priority analysis. The missing candlestick, the imprint on the carpet, and the text messages arranging a meeting between Eleanor Vance and Sarah Miller on the night of her death began to form a chilling picture. Investigators theorized that the candlestick might have been used as a tool in the killing, perhaps held over Eleanor's face during suffocation, or used in some other way that left the imprint before being removed from the scene and returned to the church. This hypothesis provided a potential explanation for the lack of overt trauma and the specific type of imprint found. The narrative structure of the case began to accelerate. The initial quiet mystery of Eleanor's death on Elm Street was giving way to a more focused investigation centered on the internal dynamics of the First Baptist Church and the actions taken in the desperate aftermath of the Livestream exposure. The spotlight intensified on Sarah Miller, and by extension on Pastor Anya Sharma. Sarah Miller's proximity to Pastor Sharma, her role in church administration, and her presence at Eleanor's home on the night of the estimated death raised the stakes considerably. Was she acting alone, perhaps in a misguided attempt to protect the pastor and the church, or was someone else involved, perhaps directing her actions? The case was moving swiftly from a general inquiry into a targeted investigation with a prime suspect directly linked to the victim in the scandal. The silent house on Elm Street had held its secrets, but the combination of digital trails and subtle forensic clues was beginning to force them into the light. The plot thickened around Sarah Miller. Her admitted visit to Eleanor Vance's house on the night of her death, coupled with the incriminating text messages and the discovery of the missing church candlestick leaving a matching imprint at the crime scene, painted a damning picture. However, investigators had to prove her direct involvement in the killing, not just her presence at the scene. Sarah Miller was brought back for further questioning, this time under more intense scrutiny. She maintained her denial of harming Eleanor, sticking to her story that she simply talked to her and left. But the inconsistencies in her timeline and her inability to provide convincing details about the conversation raised red flags. Detectives pressed her on the candlestick. Had she seen? Did she touch it? She denied any knowledge of it being at Eleanor's house or returning it to the church. Her story began to show cracks under pressure. Simultaneously, the forensic results from the base of the recovered candlestick arrived. The analysis confirmed the presence of fibers consistent with the carpet in Eleanor Vance's bedroom. More critically, DNA analysis revealed trace amounts of DNA on the candlestick base. The primary profile matched Eleanor Vance. A secondary, partial DNA profile was also detected. This partial profile did not immediately match Sarah Miller or Pastor Sharma, nor anyone in the police database. This introduced a new layer of complexity and a potential narrative twist. If Sarah was the killer using the candlestick, why wasn't her DNA a clearer match? Was there a third person involved? Was the candlestick handled by someone else? Or was the DNA transfer more complex? Investigators explored several possibilities. Perhaps Sarah wore gloves, but somehow Eleanor's DNA got on the object during a struggle, and only a small amount of Sarah's was transferred. Or perhaps the partial profile belonged to someone else entirely who had also handled the candlestick at some point. This partial DNA profile opened a new investigative avenue. Who else had access to the church's altar candlesticks? Who else had reason to want Eleanor silenced? The focus widened slightly to include other individuals named in Eleanor's live stream, or those with a vested interest in protecting Pastor Sharma and the church's reputation. Investigators revisited their interviews with other choir members and church staff. Were there other conflicts or tensions within the choir beyond the pastor's relationships? Had anyone else expressed strong animosity towards Eleanor after the live stream? Was there someone else who might have gone to Eleanor's house, perhaps even after Sarah Miller left? Another critical piece of evidence emerged from Eleanor's digital footprint analysis. In addition to the texts with Sarah, there was a deleted email recovered from her sent folder, drafted but seemingly unsent or deleted before sending. It was addressed to the church board and outlined her intention to go public if her concerns about Pastor Sharma's conduct were not addressed privately. The timestamp on the draft was several weeks prior to the live stream, indicating her concerns were long-standing and that she had attempted to resolve them internally first. This detail countered any potential defense that her live stream was impulsive or malicious. It demonstrated a prior attempt at official reporting within the church hierarchy. This unsent email highlighted the structure of authority within the church, and who else might have been aware of Eleanor's dissent before the public exposure. Did members of the church board know about Eleanor's concerns? Had they taken any action? Did they dismiss her? Their knowledge or lack thereof became relevant. Investigators interviewed members of the church board. Their accounts varied. Some admitted Eleanor had vaguely expressed concerns about the pastor's leadership style or internal church matters, but none claimed she had specifically detailed allegations of inappropriate relationships to them prior to the live stream. They portrayed her concerns as generalized complaints, not specific accusations requiring formal investigation. This suggested either willful ignorance or a deliberate cover-up within the church leadership, potentially providing motive for someone else to silence Eleanor if they feared her earlier. Less public complaints could still cause problems. The narrative structure shifted again, revealing layers of potential complicity or knowledge within the church leadership that went beyond just the alleged illicit relationship. The case was no longer just about a pastor and her choir. It was also about the institution itself and who held power within it. Back at the crime scene, forensic processing yielded one more significant, subtle detail. Found tucked beneath the edge of a rug near the bedroom door was a small, clear plastic baggie containing what appeared to be white powder residue. Preliminary field testing indicated it was a common sedative or tranquilizer. This explained the lack of struggle in the room and the subtle signs of asphyxiation. Eleanor may have been incapacitated before she was suffocated or strangled. This forensic twist explained how the killing might have occurred so quietly and without immediate signs of struggle, reinforcing the theory of someone known to Eleanor gaining entry and incapacitating her. But who administered the sedative? Was it slipped into a drink during the conversation? Did the killer bring it with them? This discovery introduced the possibility that the method of killing was planned, and perhaps even premeditated. The pieces were coming together, but the full picture remained obscured by secrets and the protective wall that seemed to surround Pastor Sharma and her inner circle. The partial DNA profile remained an enigma, suggesting either the involvement of someone whose profile was not in the system, or a complex transfer event. The focus remained primarily on Sarah Miller, given her proven presence at the scene and connection to the incriminating texts and candlestick. But the possibility of another individual's involvement, perhaps working with or directing Sarah, lingered, a shadowy presence in the background of the investigation. The quiet house on Elm Street held its secrets tightly, but the evidence, piece by painstaking piece, was forcing them into the light. The investigation intensified its focus on Sarah Miller, while simultaneously working to identify the partial DNA profile found on the candlestick. Sarah's alibi for the time of Eleanor Vance's death was weak. She claimed she went straight home after leaving Eleanor's and was alone. There were no witnesses or security footage to corroborate her story for the crucial period. Detectives pressed her on the details of her meeting with Eleanor. What was the nature of their relationship? Were they friends, or was Sarah simply acting on behalf of Pastor Sharma? Sarah maintained she was trying to help Eleanor and the church, portraying her visit as a misguided attempt at reconciliation. But the recovery of the deleted email draft from Eleanor to the church board raised new questions about potential internal knowledge and attempts to manage dissent prior to the live stream. Investigators revisited church board members with this new information, faced with evidence of Eleanor's prior attempts to raise concerns internally. Some board members became less evasive. One member, under pressure, admitted that Pastor Sharma had privately mentioned to the board several weeks prior that Eleanor Vance was becoming disruptive and spreading rumors about her personal life. The pastor had characterized Eleanor's concerns as the result of jealousy or misunderstanding. The board had apparently accepted the pastor's explanation and taken no formal action, hoping the issue would resolve itself. This revealed that Pastor Sharma was aware of Eleanor's dissent before the live stream and had actively worked to discredit her privately within the church leadership. This provided a stronger potential motive for Pastor Sharma herself to want to silence Eleanor, or to orchestrate someone else doing so. It also cast a pall over the church board, suggesting they were either complicit in ignoring serious allegations, or had been deliberately misled by the pastor. The search for the source of the partial DNA profile continued. Standard database checks yielded no matches. Investigators began to consider less obvious possibilities. Could it be someone related to the pastor or Sarah Miller? Could it be someone who had recently handled the candlestick for a specific, non-church-related reason? The DNA sample was small and partial, making a definitive match difficult without a specific individual to test against. This forensic detail, while seemingly a setback, required investigators to broaden their scope while maintaining focus on their primary suspects. They began building a comprehensive profile of Pastor Sharma's inner circle and Sarah Miller's close associates, looking for individuals who might have had motive, opportunity, and access to both Sarah and the church artifacts. Backtracking Sarah Miller's movements and communications in the hours before and after the estimated time of Eleanor's death became crucial. Did she make any calls immediately after leaving Eleanor's? Did she meet up with anyone? Cell tower data was analyzed. Her phone pinged cell towers in the vicinity of Elm Street around the time of her admitted visit. However, there were gaps in the data, or pings that could potentially be explained by travel routes, making it difficult to definitively place her away from Eleanor's home for the entire period of the killing. The sedative residue found in the plastic baggie was identified more specifically through laboratory analysis. It was a common benzodiazepine, easily obtainable with a prescription or potentially through illicit channels. Investigators looked into whether Sarah Miller, Pastor Sharma, or anyone in their close circle had prescriptions for such a drug, or any connection to someone who might. This line of inquiry proved challenging, respecting privacy laws while pursuing a potential link to the crime. Witness interviews continued within the church community. While many remained loyal to Pastor Sharma, or fearful of speaking out, some individuals, particularly those who had been unsettled by the persistent rumors or the tone of the post-livestream reaction from church leadership, began to share more. One choir member, speaking anonymously, mentioned seeing Pastor Sharma and Sarah Miller in an intense, hushed conversation outside the church office late on Tuesday evening, hours after the live stream and just hours before Eleanor's estimated time of death. The witness couldn't hear what was said, but the body language was described as agitated and urgent. This placed Pastor Sharma and Sarah in close proximity and intense communication during the critical period, suggesting potential coordination. Another witness described Sarah Miller acting unusually nervous and distracted at church the day after Eleanor was found. These seemingly minor witness accounts, when compiled, corroborated the growing suspicion that Sarah Miller's visit to Eleanor's house was not an independent decision, but likely one influenced or directed by Pastor Sharma. The theory solidifying was that Sarah Miller went to Eleanor's house to silence her, potentially using a sedative to incapacitate her, and then suffocating her. The candlestick might have been involved in the process or used to press down, leaving the imprint, before being hastily returned to the church. But the partial DNA profile remained a persistent question mark. Was there a third person? Or was the DNA simply a misleading anomaly? The pressure mounted on Sarah Miller, presented with the text messages, the candlestick evidence, and the witness accounts placing her and Pastor Sharma in urgent conversation. Her composure began to crack. She maintained her innocence in the killing but became visibly distressed. Detectives utilized tactical questioning, presenting her with the evidence of her presence and connection to the crime scene artifacts, suggesting they knew she was there and they knew something had happened. The emotional restraint of the investigation contrasted with the internal turmoil of the suspect. The quiet house on Elm Street, the scene of a silent death, continued to yield its grim facts, forcing the investigation inexorably towards the heart of the First Baptist Church and the secrets buried within its leadership. The case was building, point by point, piece by painstaking piece. Faced with mounting evidence, Sarah Miller requested a lawyer. Her cooperation effectively ended. The investigation shifted to building the strongest possible case against her and determining the extent of Pastor Anya Sharma's involvement. While Sarah was the most likely person to have been physically present at Eleanor Vance's house and connected to the murder weapon, the candlestick leaving the imprint, the motive seemed stronger coming from Pastor Sharma, whose reputation and position were directly threatened by Eleanor's live stream. Investigators explored the financial implications for Pastor Sharma and the church. A scandal of this magnitude could lead to decreased donations, loss of membership, and legal challenges. Pastor Sharma had a significant personal stake in maintaining the status quo. The partial DNA profile remained a challenge. Without a match, it was difficult to definitively place another individual at the scene. However, forensic experts clarified that a partial profile could result from degraded DNA, a mixture of multiple individuals' DNA with one being dominant, Eleanor's, or a low amount of transfer. It didn't necessarily mean a whole other person was involved in the physical act of killing, but it couldn't be ruled out. This uncertainty required investigators to proceed carefully, ensuring their theory of the crime was supported by robust evidence beyond the DNA. The focus returned to the candlestick. How was it moved from the church to Eleanor's house and back? Access to the church after hours was relatively easy for key holders like Sarah Miller or Pastor Sharma. Security footage from the church, if any existed, was reviewed for activity on the night of the murder. Any relevant footage was either non-existent for the specific area where the candlesticks were kept or had been overwritten. However, security logs or keycard entries for the church around that time could provide circumstantial evidence of access. Digital forensics provided more context to the relationship between Sarah Miller and Pastor Sharma. Their communications were extensive, detailing daily church matters, planning events, and personal exchanges that revealed a deep loyalty from Sarah towards the pastor. There were no explicit messages planning a murder, but their pattern of communication, particularly the urgent messages exchanged after the live stream, suggested a close working relationship where Sarah might have been acting on the pastor's behalf or under her influence. The theory began to solidify. Pastor Sharma, her reputation and livelihood threatened by Eleanor's live stream, confided in or directed her loyal assistant, Sarah Miller, to confront Eleanor and silence her. Sarah, perhaps believing she was protecting the church and the pastor she admired, went to Eleanor's house. The confrontation escalated, and she used a method of killing that left minimal obvious trace, potentially aided by a sedative, and using an object like the candlestick to subdue or suffocate Eleanor. The candlestick was then returned to the church to remove the evidence. Witness accounts about Pastor Sharma's demeanor after the murder were also telling. While she maintained a public facade of grief and calls for prayer, some church members observed her acting strangely detached or overly focused on managing the fallout rather than mourning Eleanor. Her sermons in the weeks following the murder were noted as being particularly forceful on themes of loyalty, forgiveness, and the dangers of sowing discord. These observations, while not direct evidence of guilt, added to the growing picture of a leader potentially prioritizing control over genuine grief. The legal process began to move forward, based on the accumulated evidence, the timeline, the text messages, Sarah Miller's presence at the scene, the candlestick evidence with Eleanor's DNA and the matching imprint, and the sedative residue. The Franklin Police Department, in consultation with the district attorney's office, determined they had sufficient probable cause to arrest Sarah Miller for the murder of Eleanor Vance. The arrest was made quietly, avoiding the dramatic spectacle that could further inflame the already fractured church community. Sarah Miller was taken into custody and charged with homicide. The charging documents detailed the evidence gathered, laying out the state's initial theory of the case, that Sarah Miller caused the death of Eleanor Vance. While the investigation had strong circumstantial evidence suggesting Pastor Sharma's motive and potential influence, proving her direct involvement in the act of killing or its planning remained challenging without a confession or more direct evidence. The case against Sarah Miller would be the state's primary focus initially, though the investigation into whether she acted alone or was directed continued. The media in Franklin and beyond picked up the story. The initial scandal of the pastor's alleged affairs was now overshadowed by the shocking news of murder within the congregation, with the pastor's close associate charged. The quiet life on Elm Street, the seemingly peaceful church on the square, these symbols of small-town tranquility were now irrevocably linked to betrayal and violence. The community of Franklin, Tennessee wrestled with the grim reality that such events could unfold in their midst, shattering their sense of security and challenging their faith in institutions they had long trusted. The legal battle would now begin, fought in courtrooms rather than on live streams, to determine the truth behind Eleanor Vance's silent death. The arrest of Sarah Miller sent another shockwave through Franklin. The local news covered the development extensively, detailing the charges and the preliminary evidence. The community divided further. Some stood by Sarah, believing her to be incapable of violence and a scapegoat. Others felt a grim confirmation of their suspicions about the toxicity within the church's inner circle. Pastor Anya Sharma remained in her position, though her public appearances became less frequent and more guarded. The church attendance reportedly dropped, and internal conflict escalated. The legal proceedings against Sarah Miller began with her arraignment. She entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecution presented their initial evidence during preliminary hearings, outlining the timeline from the live stream to the discovery of Eleanor Vance's body, highlighting the text messages, Sarah's admitted visit, the candlestick evidence, and the presence of the sedative residue. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the DNA profile wasn't a full match to Sarah, and that the candlestick could have been handled by many people. They suggested other individuals named in the live stream or with grievances against Eleanor could be suspects, attempting to broaden the scope of the case and introduce reasonable doubt. The defense also hinted at the possibility of a struggle where Eleanor's death was accidental, not intentional murder, though the forensic evidence of asphyxiation and the use of a sedative made this argument difficult. As the case moved towards trial, the prosecution worked to strengthen their argument, particularly regarding the partial DNA profile. They explored the possibility of familial DNA searching, though privacy laws and database limitations made this complex. They also focused on ruling out other potential contributors to the DNA, such as first responders or forensic personnel. The partial profile remained a point of uncertainty, but the prosecution believed the totality of the other evidence was sufficient to prove Sarah Miller's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They theorized the partial DNA was either a minor transfer from Sarah, a degraded sample, or potentially a contaminant. Key witness testimonies were prepared. Neighbors who noted Eleanor's undisturbed mail and cessation of routine would establish the timeline of her disappearance. Forensic experts would testify about the cause of death, the crime scene processing, the candlestick imprint, the fibers and the DNA evidence. Digital forensic experts would detail the text message exchange and the recovery of Eleanor's deleted email draft to the church board, establishing her prior attempts to raise concerns internally. The choir member who saw Pastor Sharma and Sarah Miller in urgent conversation would testify to their close relationship and seemingly coordinated activity around the time of the murder. While Pastor Sharma was not charged, her name featured prominently in the prosecution's theory regarding motive and potential influence. The prosecution argued that Sarah Miller acted to protect Pastor Sharma and the church's reputation, implying that the pastor's actions and the scandal she created were the driving force behind the murder. This strategy aimed to highlight the motive without having to directly prove the pastor's physical involvement in the killing. The courtroom proceedings became a public forum for the secrets of the First Baptist Church. Testimony about the alleged inappropriate relationships within the choir, previously confined to rumor and a single live stream, was now presented as background context for a brutal murder. The contrast between the sacred setting of a church and the alleged misconduct and violence was underscored throughout the trial. Eleanor Vance, the quiet choir member, became the central figure, her life meticulously dissected to understand why she was killed. Her character witnesses portrayed her as a woman of deep faith and integrity, someone who would only speak out if she believed it was morally necessary. This portrayal countered any defense suggestion that she was malicious or untrustworthy. The trial proceedings were followed closely in Franklin. The details presented were grim, laying bare the human cost of the secrets and the lengths to which someone would go to keep them hidden. Sarah Miller sat stoically for most of the testimony, occasionally conferring with her lawyer. The emotional weight in the courtroom was palpable, despite the procedural formality. Testimony about the discovery of Eleanor's body, the initial crime scene observations, and the medical examiner's findings were delivered with clinical precision, yet painted a haunting picture of Eleanor's final moments. The evidence surrounding the candlestick and the sedative residue provided a chilling glimpse into the possible mechanics of the killing. A quiet, deliberate act of violence aimed at silencing dissent. The prosecution systematically built their case, linking Sarah Miller to the time, place, and method of Eleanor's death. While the partial DNA profile remained a lingering question, the cumulative weight of the circumstantial evidence was substantial. The defense attempted to capitalize on the DNA ambiguity and the lack of a direct confession or eyewitness to the killing itself, arguing the state's case was built on inference and suspicion rather than definitive proof. The legal battle was hard-fought, a deliberate process of presenting facts and challenging interpretations, aiming to sway the jury towards either conviction or reasonable doubt. The trial of Sarah Miller for the murder of Eleanor Vance proceeded. The prosecution presented their case methodically, laying out the timeline of events. Eleanor Vance's live stream exposing alleged misconduct by Pastor Anya Sharma and choir members, the resulting turmoil, the text messages arranging a meeting between Eleanor and Sarah Miller on the night of the murder, Sarah's admitted presence at Eleanor's home, the discovery of Eleanor's body showing signs of asphyxiation, the estimated time of death aligning with Sarah's visit, the presence of sedative residue, the missing church candlestick, and the crucial forensic link, the candlestick's base matching the imprint on Eleanor's carpet and bearing her DNA along with a partial unknown profile. They argued that Sarah Miller, acting out of intense loyalty to Pastor Sharma and a desire to protect the church from scandal, went to Eleanor's house with the intent to silence her permanently. They suggested the sedative was used to incapacitate Eleanor, and the candlestick, readily available at the church, was either brought by Sarah or was already at the scene and used as a tool in the suffocation or strangulation, leaving the imprint before being removed. The defense countered vigorously. They highlighted the partial and unmatched nature of the secondary DNA profile, suggesting it belonged to the real killer. They argued Sarah Miller's visit was solely to talk Eleanor down, and that someone else entered the house after she left. They questioned the time frame, suggesting Eleanor might have been alive when Sarah left. They emphasized the lack of a clear eyewitness to the murder and the absence of a confession. The defense presented character witnesses who portrayed Sarah Miller as a devout, peaceful woman, incapable of such violence. They attempted to portray Eleanor Vance as unstable or unreliable, motivated by malice or jealousy, though this was difficult given her reputation in the community and the evidence of her prior attempts to raise concerns internally. The courtroom drama unfolded against the backdrop of a community still reeling from the scandal. Members of the First Baptist Church sat on both sides of the aisle, some supporting Sarah, others seeking justice for Eleanor. Pastor Anya Sharma was notably absent from most of the proceedings. Her presence felt indirectly through the testimony and the underlying motive presented by the prosecution. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken accusations and grief. During cross-examination, the prosecution challenged Sarah Miller's alibi and her account of her visit to Eleanor's house. They pressed her on inconsistencies, her demeanor after the murder, and her relationship with Pastor Sharma. While she remained outwardly composed, the detailed questioning forced her to revisit the events of that night, revealing her nervousness and evasiveness on key points. The candlestick became a central piece of physical evidence, brought into the courtroom for the jury to see, a heavy, seemingly innocuous religious object, now imbued with sinister significance. Forensic experts explained the process of matching the imprint and the significance of the DNA findings, acknowledging the limitation of the partial profile, but emphasizing the other evidence linking the candlestick to the crime scene. The sedative residue evidence provided the how, explaining the lack of struggle, and suggested premeditation. The deleted email draft sent by Eleanor to the church board solidified the why. Eleanor was not an impulsive gossiper but someone who tried to follow church protocols, indicating her motivations were serious and posed a long-term threat to the church leadership if not addressed. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for several days, wrestling with the circumstantial nature of the evidence and the lingering question raised by the partial DNA profile. The community waited anxiously. The fate of Sarah Miller, and implicitly the reputation of the First Baptist Church and Pastor Anya Sharma, rested on the jury's decision. The silence that had initially shrouded Eleanor Vance's death was replaced by the tense anticipation of the verdict, a collective holding of breath in Franklin, Tennessee. This case, born from secrets shared in a choir loft and revealed in a live stream, had reached its legal culmination. The jury returned their verdict. Sarah Miller was found guilty of the murder of Eleanor Vance. The verdict brought a mix of reactions: relief for some who felt justice had been served for Eleanor, and devastation for others who believed Sarah was innocent. The jury, it was later learned, accepted the prosecution's argument that the totality of the circumstantial evidence, including the text messages, Sarah's presence at the scene, the candlestick imprint matching the recovered church artifact, the sedative residue, and Eleanor's DNA on the candlestick, was sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Sarah Miller was the person who killed Eleanor Vance. They determined that the partial unmatched DNA profile was not enough to create reasonable doubt, potentially viewing it as a minor anomaly or contamination rather than evidence of a third-party killer. The judge sentenced Sarah Miller to a significant prison term, acknowledging the calculated nature of the crime aimed at silencing the victim. In sentencing, the judge remarked on the profound tragedy of a life taken for exposing truth, and the corruption that had festered within an institution of faith. The legal case against Sarah Miller concluded that the questions surrounding Pastor Anya Sharma's role persisted. While not charged with murder, the evidence presented at trial strongly implied her motive and potential influence on Sarah Miller's actions. No direct evidence emerged linking Pastor Sharma to giving the order or being physically present during the killing, preventing her from being charged in Eleanor's death. However, the public perception of her leadership in the church was irreparably damaged. Investigations into the allegations raised in Eleanor Vance's livestream regarding Pastor Sharma's conduct continued separately, potentially involving church disciplinary bodies or civil litigation. But the criminal investigation into the murder focused squarely on Sarah Miller as the perpetrator. The First Baptist Church in Franklin, Tennessee, continued to exist, but its congregation was fractured, its reputation tarnished. Pastor Sharma eventually resigned from her position months after the trial, citing the need for the church to heal and move forward, though many believed it was a forced departure due to the ongoing scandal and loss of trust. The alleged inappropriate relationships within the choir were never fully litigated in the criminal trial for the murder itself, but the details aired as background context left little doubt in the public mind about the underlying issues that Eleanor Vance had tried to expose. Eleanor Vance's quiet life ended violently, but her decision to speak out had far-reaching consequences, exposing not only the alleged misconduct of a pastor, but also the darker realities that can lie hidden beneath a surface of respectability and faith. Her home on Elm Street remained, no longer just a quiet house in a peaceful neighborhood, but a place forever marked by the events that unfolded within its walls. A silent testament to the human capacity for both profound conviction and desperate, violent acts. The legacy of this case in Franklin is one of fractured trust and enduring sadness. A woman sought to reveal truth within her spiritual community and paid the ultimate price. The silence in her home was replaced by the noise of scandal, investigation, and trial, culminating in a verdict that closed one chapter but left deep, unhealing wounds. The empty seat she left in the First Baptist Church choir was a stark reminder of the voice that was silenced, a voice that had dared to challenge power and hypocrisy, ultimately leading to a quiet death on a residential street in a town that would never again see its church in quite the same way. The human impact was devastating. A life lost, a family grieving, a community divided, and a church scarred by the revelations and the violence they triggered. It serves as a grim, haunting reminder of the destructive power of secrets and the tragic consequences that can arise when truth is met, not with accountability, but with fatal force. The quiet town of Franklin, Tennessee learned a hard, unforgettable lesson about the darkness that can reside even in the most seemingly virtuous places.